presentation and corresponding slides are copyrighted by Robson Forensic and may not be recorded, copied, distributed, or otherwise used without authorization. That being said, we love to put on small presentations for individual firms or for regional legal organizations. If you think that today's session would be applicable for your firm or similar, reach out to us. In many cases, we can do this. We've got a lot of topics that have already been developed, so let us know what you're interested in. Let us know what you want to learn about, and let us help you get there. We've got a ton of expertise in-house. Let's put it to work. So on to today's program, and thank you for your patience as I go through those first few slides. Albert Corellis is our first presenter. Albert, I'm going to stop sharing my screen if you want to go ahead and share yours. And Albert, I know we've been having some issues with your camera over the last few days, so if it continues to be an issue, we'll just go ahead and turn that off. So Albert, I see your slides. It looks like your microphone's still muted. What I love about, or what's unique about your background, I should say, is that in addition to being a registered architect, you're also a residential property manager. You've owned your own properties for over 30 years. You've managed them in a safe manner. Before you get started on your session, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and the type of cases you investigate at Robson Forensic?
Sure, of course, and thanks, Jesse. Hello, everyone, and good afternoon. As I said, my name is Albert Corellis. So I've been practicing architecture for over 25 years. I received my first license in the state of Illinois, and we're now registered in 7 additional states, predominantly in and around the Midwest. I've worked on a variety of building types, everything from commercial, institutional, industrial, multi and single family residential, as well as land planning of subdivisions. Concurrently, I was a part owner of a property management company which owned and managed its own buildings. So we had 60 residential units, over 9 buildings, and a 20,000 square foot office building. I still own and manage 10 residential units. One of them being the first building that I had purchased was a 6-flat apartment building in 1993, which I still own and manage today. During my career, I was also a developer of single and multi-family housing. I built single family for spec, additions, remodeled homes, and I developed an 11-unit townhouse subdivision, taking the project from land acquisition through zoning, platting, infrastructure, including a 2-year maintenance program after infrastructure is accepted by the village, the construction of the units, sales, and management of the homeowners association until the units were sold out. I'm also certified by the Accredited Snow Contractors Association, showing that I have some proven knowledge of industry standards of snow and ice management. I'm also an accredited residential manager through the Institute of Real Estate Management. And I received that through demonstration of my experience, taking courses, and passing examinations. So what is residential property management? It is an area of specialization within the real estate industry, which involves a property's operation, upkeep, preservation, and fiscal concerns. The building types have a variety of forms, as well as the type of management. For instance, I was an owner and manager, while there are companies that are just managers for a number of different owners. The types of buildings or properties that we see that are included in residential property management go from individual apartments to multifamily communities, which could be gated or not, but typically have private roads, on-site staff and offices and amenities, to single family housing, senior and assisted living, condominiums and homeowners associations, mobile homes, student housing, affordable housing. So all the same principles of residential management apply to all these different types of housing, and with just some variations and special requirements for each one. So through my career and experience with properties I've owned and managed, the first things I would be looking for as a forensic expert in a premises safety case involving property managers is maintenance and inspections. So these two things go hand in hand as one brings on the other, and a manager's action or inaction really makes a difference. So let's take a look at different types of inspections. There are two main types. One is routine, the other is special. A routine inspection is just a regularly scheduled inspection to evaluate property conditions and uses a checklist to make sure you've covered all the different aspects that you would want to be looking for. This includes site inspections, sidewalks, parking lots, exterior elements of a building, and exterior lighting. Unit inspections would be to make sure that people are living in a clean condition, that there's no infestations, that the plumbing is in good condition, doors, windows, or locks are all functioning. Might be surprising, but not all tenants will report an issue to management and will let certain things just languish, and small problems end up becoming big problems. So it's good to have a regular unit inspection. On special inspections, we have move in and move out, which is to determine what the unit needs for repair or replacement. We have systemic issues. So if it's noted that a particular item is malfunctioning across a number of units, an inspection is needed to investigate the problem and across all units that might have this particular item in them. And then there's always a special inspection after a fire or a disaster to determine the damage, the cause, and how to prevent these things in the future. Maintenance, there's 4 different types of maintenance, and the most basic type of maintenance is custodial or janitorial or housekeeping. This just helps maintain the property in a clean condition, extends the life of certain aspects of the property, and it's a great way for staff to note and discover any kinds of defects. Even just by collecting the garbage around the property on a routine basis, things can be noticed. Cleaning of stairwells and hallways, so forth. You can see items that might be damaged and need attention. The next type of maintenance is preventive, which covers everything from building systems to unit components. So this ensures a reliable performance of those components and extends the life of a building. It requires also a regular schedule and checklists, and staff should be keeping a log of the work that they do. Then there's corrective and reactive, which is the most common type. And this is when a tenant calls in and says, I've got a problem in my apartment. And maintenance staff will respond to it. Then there's emergencies. So these include snow removal, security issues, fires, natural disasters. These are things that have to be performed immediately and in a timely manner. And finally, there's deferred maintenance, which is more of a capital improvement type of expenditure. And it's when you notice that conducting preventive maintenance just is no longer reasonable, and you have to outlay from your budget a large sum of money to make an improvement before you've actually anticipated it. So let's review a few possible scenarios where a residential property manager could offer their forensic skill and expertise. This first case scenario, we call it a dangerous bifold door. A bifold door falls on a resident who's a toddler trying to open up a closet door. The door falls out of its track, causing them to be injured. And it's in an older building where the doors were solid core. And you can see one of these 2 leaves here combined weighed 80 pounds. So during a site inspection, we would look for signs of why the door failed. Damaged track, missing hardware, was the hardware damaged, and was the hardware even rated then for the weight of the door? Then during a review of case material, we find that maintenance staff made no routine inspections of the units. They only performed reactive maintenance and relied on tenant complaints to take care of any kind of issues. But a review of their maintenance logs showed a significant number of calls to repair bifold doors throughout the facility over the past 2 years. This should have led to a special inspection of the maintenance staff inspecting all bifold doors throughout their entire facility. In our second scenario, we have a collapsed stair. Tenant is exiting the building to a parking lot. When the stair gives way under them, they fall and they're injured. What we see here is a typical Chicago wood porch and stair, which serves as a second means of egress out of a building. This housing having to be HUD certified, which required their real estate assessment center, or REACT, to inspect it every 1 to 3 years. And they inspect the properties to make sure that the properties are kept in a decent, safe, sanitary, and good repair. Depending on the score they get, they might get a reinspection in a year. If they get a high score, it could be 3 years later. But with this HUD certification, the staff has to make monthly inspections and monthly inspection reports. And all these reports for over the years showed that these stairs were always reported as in good condition. During a site inspection, it's discovered that the stairs weren't plumb, stringers weren't fastened properly, there were numerous screws were rusting, and there were loose treads and risers. And this is just 2 years after the incident and the last inspection. After this inspection, we decided to help our client come up with questions for a deposition of the maintenance supervisor who signed off on these inspections. And during that, it's discovered that he had training in HVAC repair and some electrical skills, but didn't have an understanding of carpentry. So he conducted his inspections based on his observations of what the REAC inspectors did, walking up and down the stairs, shaking the guardrails, looking under the stairs. And when asked what he was looking for, he really couldn't explain it. Then when asked further, he couldn't even define what a tread was, a riser, or a stringer were. So he even followed, like REACT protocol. They're supposed to look for cracks, rotting, rust, holes, and missing pieces. And he didn't know that he was even supposed to be doing that. So basically, they rendered the inspections meaningless. And so did the property manager hire assigned staff with sufficient knowledge and experience for the required tasks needed by their position? So in this final scenario, we have an unlocked entry that leads to an assault. The entrance to the building is unsecured. You use an intercom system with a buzzer and electric lock, and the system is shorted out. The tenants notify the management same day because they can't get in the building, but they can get out by a push bar. So maintenance staff comes out and they unlock the door, and they leave it unlocked. And 2 days later, the system still hasn't been repaired. And that evening, a tenant is assaulted by a non-resident who gained access to the building. So maintenance staff to make a special inspection. They were unable to repair the system, and it required an outside contractor. And that's very common. As we see, not all maintenance staff have knowledge of every system. And it's common to have a list of contractors in your Rolodex ready to go when they're needed. But this was an emergency situation. The building was not secured, and the property manager, either by miscommunication or just forgetfulness, failed to contact an outside service for emergency repair and failed to secure the building. And so they did not meet standard of care for property management. There are other issues that I've also covered as a property manager, residential property manager, besides just inspection and maintenance. And some of these are tenant screenings from background checks, criminal history and rental history, tenant complaints, and did a property manager respond in a timely manner to maintenance issues, or do they respond at all to complaints about disturbance of peaceful enjoyment by other tenants? Emotional support animals and pet policies, where an ESA identifies the person who needs support, not the animal, but the animal is not considered a pet, so pet policies don't apply. But there are special provisions that if the animal doesn't meet certain expectations, they are no longer an emotional support animal. There's also contracts then with outside vendors regarding pest control, groundskeeping, snow and ice removal. The contracts will always lay out the conditions for the contractors to come out, and then where their responsibility will end and where the owners will begin. Also reviewed leases regarding rules and regulations and lesser versus lessee obligations, as well as homeowners associations versus individual owners. So with that, I'll hand it back to Jesse, and we'll have
Albert, before we move on here on the security example that you mentioned a couple slides ago, and I apologize if you answered this, but I don't think you did. If that was your unit and the punch system to enter the building wasn't working, what's your solution? Do you have a security guard on site then until it's fixed?
If you can't get an emergency repair person out immediately, and most in my experience, a lot of the hardware and lock contractors are 24-hour service, and they will come out. We'll pay for that, but yes, they'll come out. And if you can't, then yes, you need to get someone to guard that door, guard that entrance.
Got it. Yep. Prioritizing safety of your tenants, right?
That's right.
Yeah, got it. That makes sense. Well, Albert, thanks so much. I think this was great. We have had a couple questions that came in. We'll hope to get to those at the end. So next up is Tom Lodge, and we just heard about the property management aspects. Tom's going to talk to us more about general premises safety aspects of our casework. And Tom, what I love about the presentation you've prepared are some of these examples where you're showcasing the way that people interact with the environment and why that's important. Tom, do you want to go ahead and share your screen? I'm not seeing your slides pulled up just yet. And then, I'm sorry?
How's that look?
Not quite yet. So you'll have to hit the share screen button and then choose your screen. It's just not popping for us quite yet. I'm going to blame it on the funky weather, even though it doesn't make sense. Okay, so I see your screen. Are you in slideshow mode? So from beginning?
Yes, no.
You know, I think we're showing on the wrong screen. Remember, we've seen that before. So if you hit escape and then you choose to show on your secondary monitor, it looks like you're sharing monitor 2, but presenting differently. Does that make sense? All right, so now we see the desktop. Well, here we are. Sometimes it takes a minute. Tom, before you jump into it, can you tell us a little bit more about your background and the types of cases you typically handle?
Sure. First off, I'll start by saying I'm an architect and premises safety and liability expert, and not, webinar or Zoom expert. So forgive me.
Absolutely. We appreciate you being here.
Sure. So I've been practicing architecture for over 30 years, and I'll admit I cringe when I mention some of those numbers. But practicing for 30 years makes me an expert in building facility and premises safety. I've designed and renovated hundreds of buildings of all building types: hospitality, retail, medical, commercial, single, multifamily, residential, parking facilities, site planning, schools, both public, higher education, private, you name it, I've done it. As a premises safety and liability expert, my practice focuses on slip, trip, and fall events, as well as construction defects, design defects, and related professional standard of care. So I'm sure most of you know, a forensic expert provides investigation, analysis, reports, and testimony in litigation and arbitration where technical and scientific answers are useful when resolving conflicts. Here at Robson, forensic work provides an opportunity for me to apply my education, training, and experience as an architect. to buildings and structures that are already constructed, where something has failed or there's a dispute. In premises cases, we must first understand why people fall down, and then ask ourselves, why did this particular person fall down? And because a physical condition cannot be sued or defend itself, we must determine who was responsible and why. Premises liability cases, particularly those that I've been involved with, include walkway slips, trips, and falls. Those include slips on contaminated flooring, trips on floor mats, inappropriate material selection, poor housekeeping, falls and stairs and ramps. So that includes unexpected single riser steps, non-uniform treads and risers, non-delineated stair nosings, lack of handrails. Other cases include falls from heights, which entails falls through floor openings or falls through off of elevated walking surfaces, including loading docks. Playground equipment, dealing with falls, entrapment, and entanglement. Injuries from annealed or plate glass, such as walking into sliding glass doors. Retail displays and racks, including tripping hazards, falling merchandise and display equipment, and impalement on display hooks. And lastly, pedestrian knockdowns, such as those caused by fast-moving closing doors. With slip, trip, and fall incidents, your expert must provide a critique of the physical conditions. What was wrong and did it contribute to the incident? And also a critique of the actions of the parties. What did those responsible for the condition know, or what should they have known? Lastly, the expert needs to define and evaluate the standard of care. What should have existed or been done? And how did the incident condition vary from that particular standard? Architects are trained as generalists, but have areas of specialty with an overall practice, such as high-rise curtain wall systems, hospital and medical facilities, single and multifamily residential, nursing home, correction facilities. All those building types have unique needs. Engineers are specialists in their discipline. Examples are civil engineering, mechanical, electrical, material science. You must choose the right expert for your case. Architects design buildings, including flooring, walking surfaces, stairs, ramps, doors, and windows. Architects and civil engineers design site conditions, such as sidewalks and parking lots. Mechanical and electrical plumbing engineers, they design building systems that you typically don't even see. Just like doctors who take the Hippocratic Oath, architects and engineers are charged with protecting the public's health, safety, and welfare. Using my education training experience, I go in after bad things happen and figure out why they happened. My education and training as an architect include the study of physics, static and dynamic forces and their effect on the movement of human bodies, the selection of materials, including those used for walkways and floorings, the application of relevant codes and standards, and the action of pedestrians in their physical environment. Forensic methodology is how we conduct an investigation, and this includes an inspection, data gathering. Data could be documents from attorneys, research, and information gathered from the site inspection, laboratory testing if necessary, research and analysis, and development of reports or other means of presenting our professional opinion. A dangerous condition is a factor of hazard and risk. I often come across attorneys who may not understand the difference between hazard and a dangerous condition. And attorneys aren't alone. I mean, there are many other professionals who don't understand the nuances.
You can count me on that one, Tom, before I was here for many years.
Yeah, true. A hazard is defined as something that causes harm, has an innate, characteristic or property that may cause harm. Risk, that's the likelihood that someone will encounter that particular hazard. And the two together creates a dangerous condition. Factors that impact the safety of floors for pedestrians include physical properties of materials, particularly selected for those buildings. In bathrooms, it's reasonable to expect that there would be water and that the floor would and could get wet. In this photo here that I offer you is typical public restroom. Is it foreseeable that people washing their hands at the sinks on the right would drip water on the floor as they go over to the paper towels? The flooring material selected must be reasonably slip resistant. And typically, most floor materials are reasonably slip resistant when dry. However, many become dangerously slippery when wet. So in this situation, the floor material should be slip resistant when wet, or the floor must be maintained dry. Perhaps the use of mats could help maintain it in a dry condition. However, mats need to be maintained so that they themselves don't become a hazard. Would a wet floor sign be enough to protect and warn people of a dangerous slippery floor? Given that wet floor signs have become ubiquitously present and particularly used in areas that aren't even wet. So, I think wet floor signs often are completely ignored or warn of a condition that does not exist. Limits of perception is a factor of visual acuity. Pedestrians actively scan their environment, but generally are focused on wayfinding. A person has a small cone of vision that is in focus. Everywhere outside that cone of vision, it's peripheral and blurred. How and what people see and appreciate are determined by the factors listed in the slide. With pedestrian expectations, pedestrians expect things as they appear. A walking surface will remain constant unless there's a physical change, and they assume or expect that a change will be made apparent to them. Here, in this photo, the difference of material in color and texture helps indicate a change of walkway elevation. Here, by contrast, there are no visual cues to indicate a change of walkway elevation. As one approaches the stairs from above, there's no indication that, the walking surface pretty much drops away. Our hazards apparently, excuse me. I asked are hazards reasonably apparent? In mall food courts, it's expected that people would be carrying around food and liquids and that spills happen. However, perspective matters. Here looking at the slide, we don't particularly see any issues. However, from the other direction, you can see the location of, a spill of ice and water. Without seeing the waste paper can upon approach, from the other side, a pedestrian is not likely to anticipate spilled water and ice and move to avoid it. Small changes in walkway elevation are tripping hazards that may not be reasonably conspicuous. Trips typically occur in the swing phase of a pedestrian's gait. Studies have shown that pedestrians may trip on abrupt edges of 3/8 of an inch. It's the foot clearance that defines a limit of abruptness. And that's why codes and walkway standards are consistent in limiting the vertical offset to 1/4 of an inch. In this photo here with the change of elevation. Is this change of level conspicuous? Certainly a condition like this is only temporary until it's permanently removed. In a retail parking environment, as we see here in these images, pedestrians are focused on their destination and are watching out for moving cars, and that's all understandable. Environmental distractions may include confusing painted stripes, as we see here. The wheel stops are not, well, the wheel stops are easily confused with the striping, which is similar in color and dimension. Wheel stops, if used, should be painted to pop out visually against their background. So here, where's the step? This stair lacks nosing delineation that helps stair users identify the location of each step. Now contrast that with these. These stairs show means of delineating where each of the steps are. In evaluating an incident location, it's critical to document the condition thoroughly. Photographs and measurements preserve information required to adequately analyze the condition. Often experts are brought in after the fact, and as soon as an incident occurs, it's best to have somebody out there to evaluate and document that condition. While physical conditions do not naturally change very quickly, they can be repaired, removed, or replaced overnight. So it's imperative to adequately document the condition as soon as possible. In the end, our opinions are stated to a reasonable degree of architectural and technical certainty and are based on review of the materials made available to us, documentation, review, and analysis of the physical condition, review and analysis of relevant codes and standards, and the application of our education, training, and experience in the practice of architecture and facility safety. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Jesse.
Great, thank you, Tom. Before you move on, we did have a question that came in during your session, and if Tony wants to jump in on this as well, I think that's great. And it was related to the idea of perception and what's reasonable for a pedestrian to notice in their walking path. And without going into all the details of what was sent, so Robert, we might have to follow up with you afterward, but he's involved in a case where the pedestrian is navigating a somewhat complicated aisle, going up a level and going around a turn. And with a hazard on the floor, I guess the question is, how does one evaluate whether or not that plaintiff should have been able to look at the ground, essentially where their feet are, and notice pooled liquid and notice that hazard occurs? Can you provide a little insight on that process for the evaluation? And Tony, maybe you have a thought on that as well.
Okay, I'll start. First, we have to look at generally what pedestrians experience. There are codes and studies out there that demonstrate what pedestrians typically expect and what they tend to notice in their environment. So we start there. Many codes, if it's a code issue, offer analysis and commentary to help explain why some of these things matter. Codes, we mentioned codes earlier, and Tony will talk about codes. Codes are, they're performance-based. They don't give exact answers to every single situation. So it's necessary to rely on a design professional to use their education, training, and experience to evaluate certain situations, conditions. What's important for us to do is to explain why it matters, why deviations from minimum standards, are likely to cause people to slip, trip, and fall.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's good. And I know we do a lot of cases where it's where we are charged with determining, is this conspicuous? Is this open and obvious in certain markets?